Showers and a slightly cooler feel. Can't completely rule out the odd shower in the northwest on Saturday, but at the moment most places look like being dry and bright on Saturday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman, standing in for Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. I'll be bringing you all of the latest political news as Westminster reflects on an eventful party conference season and the PM heads to Prague. That and much more across the next half an hour, but first, into morning news.
Good morning, it's just gone 9:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Police in Thailand say at least 34 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a gunman opened fire at a child daycare centre in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. In a statement, they say the gunman was a former police officer. Local media are reporting that he has since killed himself and his family. The Prime Minister is heading to a summit in Prague this morning for an historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. Liz Truss will call for European unity and address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. She'll say Europe is facing its biggest crisis since the Second World War following Russian aggression. Liz Truss will also hold talks with her French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. The Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over a demand for an above-inflation increase on pay. The RCN's General Secretary says it's a once-in-a-generation chance to improve nurses' pay and staff shortages. The result of the ballot is due early next month. Meanwhile, around 500 emergency call handlers are set to join a BT Group walkout today. The Communication Workers Union, which represents BT workers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU said the position had changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. Further walkouts are planned later this month. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to The Briefing with Inaya.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman. Well, plenty to discuss this morning, so let's get stuck right in. The Prime Minister will attend an inaugural summit of European leaders in Prague today, with energy, migration and the war in Ukraine all high on the agenda. During Truss's keynote speech, she lashed out at what she described as the anti-growth coalition, who criticised her mini-budget. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, has the details.
Liz Truss arrived in Birmingham after a torrid first month in office. And for the first 3 days of conference, it only seemed to get worse. So her speech was an attempt to reset, to win over critics inside the party and out.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth.
The Prime Minister was interrupted by Greenpeace protesters, asking who had voted for her changes. But it only seemed to unite members in the hall.
It's always more taxes, more regulation and more meddling. Wrong, wrong, wrong.
It's just a month since Liz Truss became Prime Minister, but already we've seen accusations of coups, cabinet splits, and even talk about Truss's very survival as PM. Will this speech be enough to turn things around? This is how it went down with members.
She showed she knows what she's talking about. She got them in her hand after about 5 minutes, and then she just grew and grew and grew.
I think she did very well, yeah. No cheese speech moments. It was really good. I was a bit worried, but no, I think she did a great job.
Brilliant, absolutely fantastic, much better than I'd expected. Before I was a bit worried, but now I feel very reassured.
Birmingham has provided a platform for those who disagree with the PM. Her speech might help win some of them back. But as she scurried to Westminster, she will need to prove she has the strategy and steel to survive. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Now on to that new summit in Europe. The Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said Britain was looking at the new grouping of European countries called the European Political Community with an open mind, going on to say we want to find ways of working well with our neighbours and partners and friends in Europe. Well, joining us now to bring us the latest from Prague is our political editor, Darragh McCaffrey. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us on the programme. Could you just tell us a bit more about what is going on with regards to this new community?
Well, leaders are arriving from 44 nation states this morning here in Prague. And Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has just landed. Liz Truss is in the air. We're expecting her to land actually in the next hour or so. What is this European political community? Well, essentially it's the brainchild of the French President Emmanuel Macron. His idea is to kind of actually put Europe at the centre of global affairs a bit more beyond the European Union, which of course has got 27 member states. Had Britain up until relatively recently. And it's not just the UK that is here outside of the European Union. You've got countries like Turkey, like Norway, many of the Western Balkan countries, countries like Azerbaijan as well. Now, notably, of course, Russia and Belarus are not here for very obvious reasons. Ukraine is pretty high up the agenda. We are expecting to hear from President Zelensky, who's going to dial in this meeting a little later on. This Truss argument is that Europe is facing the worst crisis since the Second World War. And it's not just that war in Ukraine, it's also around energy security, hence why actually Norway's attendance is quite important, given the fact that it is a large supplier of gas to Europe, but particularly to the UK as well. And in addition to that, there's going to be lots of discussions about migration too. And again, Liz Truss, when I spoke to her the other night, was making this point that migration isn't just an issue for the UK, it is for much of continental Europe. And if there is to be a solution to, let's say, the small boats crisis in the English Channel, in part that is going to have to be done through France and other countries to help try and stem migration through continental Europe. So essentially this is kind of a new form, a much wider form, much looser form. The Prime Minister making clear that she does not want this going any particular direction. It doesn't want necessarily deeper integration, but her argument is that when some of the big global talking points that affect Britain are being discussed, she wants a seat at the table. She wants to be part of that conversation. She's even suggested, Anaya, that if this goes well, the UK could well host the next one in London, which Emmanuel Macron wants within the next 6 months. So it's going to be a really fascinating day. She is going to have a one-on-one with the French President, also with Mark Rutte, who's the Dutch Prime Minister, maybe even Ursula von der Leyen as well. As I say, really, really fascinating day in a gloriously sunny Czech Republic, Prague this morning.
Thank you so much for bringing us that update, political editor Darren McCaffrey. Thank you. Well, I'm joined now by Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, to give us his reaction from the Tory flanks. Thank you so much for joining me on the programme. I mean, firstly, what's your reaction to Liz Truss's speech? I mean, do you think that she came across as confident and self-assured, or is she still quite worried?
I mean, I think it was a pretty good speech by Liz Truss's standards. She's nobody's idea of a standout orator, but it was good, and especially after those protesters really rallied the crowd to her side. But I really don't think it did what she needed to do. Unfortunately, things have happened in the wrong order. If this speech had happened before the mini-budget and it had been part of a broader attempt to reassure her MPs and backbenchers and the voters about what her economic plan was going to be, it might have been a good speech. But unfortunately, because the mini-budget had already happened, what she actually needed to do was reassure those MPs that she's going to get a grip on the country and stabilise that position in the polls. And I'm afraid I don't think they're going to do that. In fact, from when I'm speaking to people at Tory conference, they're more worried because in just a few weeks, the Chancellor is going to have, in theory, to find tens of billions of pounds worth of spending cuts to balance those tax cuts. They don't think he can do it, and they think that there's much more to come.
Moments for you in regards to the conference. I mean, Home Secretary Suella Braverman seemed to spark a lot of discussions about some of the things that she said around immigration and so on. Did that attract you?
I mean, so Conservative Home runs a full suite of events at Party Conference, so I'm afraid I was marching from one to the other, chairing most of them, so I was very much a ghost at the feast at Conservative Party Conference. But I think for me, actually, the most interesting thing was when I was talking to people, when I managed to get away, when I got into the bars and some of the receptions, talking to MPs and advisors behind the scenes, and getting an impression of what the mood was inside the government, because it was absolutely fascinating. Just the sheer number of Tory MPs and strategists who are pricing into their calculations about the next general election the idea that Liz Truss won't be leading the Conservatives at that point. It's an absolutely remarkable finding when you remember that she was elected barely sort of a month, 2 months ago.
And, you know, we have heard things from Grant Shapps and Michael Gove and so on. I mean, have you been worried about some of the more rebellious discussions that have gone on, or do you think that this is expected given that she is trailing so far behind in the polls right now?
I mean, I think Liz Truss should absolutely be worried by the level of dissent currently visible in the ranks of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, because it means it's not just about whether or not they get rid of her. That's the important thing to remember. That's a very big step to take. But her delivering on her programme, that growth plan that she's outlined, that she and the Chancellor have committed to, does depend on the votes of Conservative MPs. And it only takes about 35 of them to vote with the opposition to torpedo anything that they try to do. That's what killed off the 45p rate cut, but that could potentially kill off everything. If you talk to the Treasury spads, they're thinking they're going to find the Chancellor's spending cuts from the spending departments. The only way you can get tens of billions of pounds worth of cuts is from the big departments. But if you go and talk to education, health, work and pensions, none of them are expecting the government to successfully get cuts through the House of Commons. So no, the lack of loyalty and discipline from Tory MPs should be very concerning for anyone in Downing Street hoping that Liz Truss can deliver her economic agenda.
I mean, do you think people may be being too hard on the Prime Minister? I mean, it's only been a matter of weeks. I mean, she inherited a very challenging situation, whether that's the consequences of the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, also the backlog of COVID and so on. I mean, do you think people are being too hard on her?
Not necessarily. I think obviously there's a lot of wisdom to the basic Truss premise that we need growth. That's absolutely true. The UK economy has not been growing strongly for a long time. Stronger growth means that on the same tax level, we get more money for public services, workers get to take more money home, and so on. But I think even amongst people who support Liz Truss's economics, there's real anger about how badly this has been done, about the fact that she didn't take the time to reassure MPs, to square off the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility, about the fact that despite announcing a huge packet of what could have been quite popular measures, especially the energy package, which we have not talked about enough, she and the Chancellor led on a couple of very, very unpopular measures, such as the 45p tax rate. And of course, every Tory MP is angry about the fact that it seems, based on the polling, that this last couple of weeks has just thrown needlessly the next election, which was a very winnable election if they had focused mostly on delivering the 2019 manifesto.
And how do you think that she can turn this around now? I mean, some observers are saying that she's hoping for, short-term pain for long-term gain, and some of the benefits of the policies that she has instituted will be the beneficiary of them in the coming months. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think the problem with that is, again, she's right in that any pro-growth strategy would involve short-term disruption, and the long-term benefits would be worth it. But there are a couple of problems with that. The first is there's no point having a long-term plan if it won't get you past the next election. And I think that a lot of Tory MPs are looking at the time it takes to bring legislation through the House of Commons, which is, up to a year, and then the amount of time they'll have left before the election. And they're just thinking these policies, even if they're right, aren't going to have time to take effect before we're facing the voters in 2024. The other problem is that the two things, whatever you think of them on other grounds, the two things that would really kickstart growth and would get you perhaps up to that 2.5% growth figure is either hugely increasing immigration or taking the brakes off house building, building millions of homes, helping to build railways, infrastructure, and so on. Now, for different reasons, the Conservative Party and its voters do not like either of those options. So there's actually not much prospect at all of getting to 2.5% growth. So I think what MPs are worried about is the idea that this programme is going to amount to quite a lot of pain, but for very little gain, at least by 2024.
And finally, if not Liz, then who? Because we just had a leadership race and it doesn't seem to be enough time to really have a new person and get them the popularity they need in terms of the public and so on. That potential would only strengthen Keir Starmer's hand. What do you think?
I mean, based on the conversations I've been having so far, I think the default assumption, and it's already very early days, but I think the default assumption, if there is a change of leader, is that the next election is probably lost. But there is a big difference between going down with, say, Liz Truss, if she hasn't improved her position, with a very unpopular prime minister, or switching to somebody who's not going to win, but who could be popular, who could shave 6 or 7 points off the defeat, because that's the difference between the Tories being competitive again in 2029 and the Tories being out until the mid-2030s or later. So I think if there is a change of leader at this point, it will not be to somebody who they expect to win another term, although obviously they'd love to find someone who could do that. It will just be about making that loss in 2024 as narrow as possible so the party can refresh and come straight back into government, ideally by 2030.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us that fascinating insight. Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Thank you. Now, on to the story that worries all of us. As prices rise and temperatures drop, the cost of energy. According to a new analysis from Cornwall Insight, the first costing of the government's energy support package, Liz Truss' intervention to freeze energy prices for households for 2 years, is expected to cost the government £89 billion. We're discussing such vast sums of money. Many of us are asking, how can we afford these measures? Or is this, again, something we need to do in the short term for a longer term benefit? Well, Andy Mayer, the Chief Operating Officer and Energy Analyst at the IEA, joins me live in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, is this a necessary huge sum of money just because the energy prices for ordinary people are frankly spiralling?
Well, politically, the government has decided that is the case. And just to be clear, the 89 is just the residential side of it. The business scheme is another 22 to 44 billion pounds on top. So the easiest figure to use is about 100 to 200 billion pounds of spending every year for the duration of the crisis. Now, in international terms, what it looks like at the moment, although not all countries have made their schemes clear, is the UK spending about twice as much as anybody else in trying to address the problem with the energy crisis, which the government is putting out as being a huge positive, but it isn't. It's showing that they are spending money in a way that's more wasteful than other countries at the moment. Now, what's right about it is that it's a very easy scheme to help people with the cost of living crisis. So everybody in the UK can be assured that although the winter this year and next is going to be difficult, it's not going to be as difficult as it would be were you fully exposed to market prices. The problem with it is that it's the same as the 45p tax rate. We're subsidising everybody, which means we're subsidising swimming pools and hot tubs for very rich people who can afford this, as well as people who are living right on the breadline and would have to choose between heating and eating if they didn't do it. So there are better ways of doing this scheme.
So what are the kind of alternative options then?
Well, what we said right up front when they first brought this in is what they could have done was do targeted welfare, so increasing the benefits, so they then wouldn't be having the other debate they're having at the moment about not raising benefits enough, and targeted tax cuts. So tax cuts for everybody, like the cut in income tax, cutting VAT across the board, raising the allowances that have got them into such trouble with the left-wing think tanks. They could have had a much more pro-distributional impact, as well as dealing with the problem, and in a way that the politics would actually be better for them, because nobody's going to thank them for a benefit they can't see, which is what this is. So your energy bills are roughly doubling on last year. So all you're seeing is your cost of living is going down. Sorry, your cost of living is going up and your income is going down, or what you can spend the money on. And if they'd actually enable people to keep more of their own money and spend it on energy bills, or if they'd already invested in energy efficiency, be rewarded for that investment, then not only would the people feel better about it, but they'd also be encouraged and incentivised to use energy more efficiently or use energy less.
I mean, do you think that this could have long-term consequences? A lot of the money that we are spending and essentially kind of handouts, even though they are paid for by the taxpayer, and also increased borrowing, as we saw with COVID, the hundreds of billions that were spent on that. I mean, do you think that this is something that could have longer-term effects?
Well, the markets have already given an answer to that question with this horrible crisis that's happened on the eve of the mini-budget. And there's no hard rule here. There's no percentage of debt to GDP, i.e. the amount of debt we have versus the amount of money we make every year, that can tell you when a crisis is going to happen. What is going on in the markets is at some point, whether it's Tory socialism or Labour socialism, you eventually run out of other people's money, and the market says we're not going to lend it to you anymore. So there are two things that can happen then. One is the interest rates can go up to enable you to sell borrowing at a rate the market's prepared to bear, and that will happen in November. Or you can come up with a package of confidence measures that enable you to suggest to the market that you've got it right and they haven't.
On that point about tax cuts, though, because, I mean, if there were tax cuts, surely most people, when they have more of their own money, they don't want to spend it on spiralling energy bills. So in that sense, isn't it better that the government is actually giving them money as a recognition that this is a problem not necessarily caused by ordinary people's making, and so they don't have to spend their own money in order to meet the bill?
Well, whatever happens, we're all getting poorer because of the energy crisis. So there's no way around that. Because there is a shortage of supply of energy compared to what we're demanding, prices are rising. If energy prices rise, the price of absolutely everything connected with energy, which is everything, goes up. So we are getting poorer. What it's about is ensuring that people don't fear that they're going to be going into winter not being able to turn the heating on.
And just finally, very quickly, I mean, do you have confidence about some of the more long-term strategy and measures in relation to preventing a crisis like this from unfolding again, in terms of fracking and nuclear and diversifying our energy sources?
Well, I've got a great deal of confidence the government's going to do supply-side reform, which means getting the government out of the way. And that could mean, say, in nuclear, that we get the average build time of a new nuclear site down from about 13 to 17 years to somewhere closer to 5 to 8. But even that's not that impressive by international standards. On fracking, they've lifted the moratorium, great move. They've not yet done all of the deregulation they need to do to ensure the industry can actually happen quickly. And they're facing backbench rebellion from people who just refuse to accept reality that we need more gas to deal with the gas crisis.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the programme, Andy Mayer, the Chief Operating Officer and Energy Analyst at the IEA. Thank you so much. And finally this morning, the Home Office has released new figures on the number of hate crimes. I'm joined by Rabbi Jonathan Romain of Maidenhead Synagogue. Thank you. Oh, we have just lost him there. Hopefully we would be able to revisit this really important story. We're just going to go back to you, Andy, if that's OK. I mean, what's your reaction as well from the Tory party conference? I mean, do you think that they have been able to build any momentum? Because the Labour Party conference seemed to be a lot more enthusiastic.
Well, Labour have clearly got a spring in their step. They are looking at the next election and thinking for the first time in a decade that they can win. The Tories started the conference in the worst possible way, and by the end of it, they'd recovered that position to at least give people the assurance that Liz Truss had the right vision. They're now all looking to her about her execution. So is she putting in place the right measures? Can she get that parliamentary coalition back together to actually get those measures through? And there's a little bit of uncertainty. But I think if the backbenchers and big beasts like Michael Gove continue to spend the time preening in front of the media in order to enlarge their egos and prove that they could have done a better job, they're going to incur the wrath of the Tory party membership, because they don't want that. What they want is a united party delivering on the plan that the Prime Minister they chose has set out.
Well, thank you, Andy, and we'll be bringing you more on those developments, I'm sure. So we are now joined by Rabbi Jonathan Romain of Maidenhead Synagogue. Thank you so much for joining me on the programme. I mean, the Home Office have released new figures on the number of hate crimes, and it seems that there is a 26% increase in the number of hate crimes than the previous year. Does this surprise you?
Oh, it horrifies me. And it would horrify me any time. But it's even worse in the wake of what we just saw a couple of weeks ago with the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen, when there was this real coming together of the nation as a whole, most of it, we thought, and the sort of sense of solidarity and people sort of having a camaraderie that we've not seen for a very long time. And, there was this hope, there was this sense of goodwill that obviously, was surface only, and that beneath that, there are these horrible trends going on and cross currents of hate.
Oh, unfortunately, the connection isn't very good. I mean, hopefully we can revisit this very important story in the future, because it is very unfortunate to see that this is an issue that is continuing to affect our society. Well, Gloria Di Piero has an exclusive interview with Conservative MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson. He shares the motives why he defected to the Conservative Party. Let's have a look.
As a Labour Party member from a working class area, I'm waking up thinking to myself, my goodness, I'm in the same party of some of your old colleagues, your Thornburys, your McDonalds, your Jeremy Corbyns. I'm thinking, what these people are, in places like Ashfield, they would never get voted in. They are seen as political lunatics, so far removed from what actually working class people believe in. These are ideological politicians. They're not, you couldn't put them in the local Witherspoons or the local
Would you put
managers.
Jacob Rees-Mogg in a local
Yes, I would.
Witherspoons?
Absolutely,
Right,
100%.
okay,
I could, Jacob, although he's a posh man, he's come from a privileged background, he can speak to anybody. But if you drag somebody like McDonnell or Corbyn into my local miners' welfare, they would get ripped apart.
Well, you can watch the full interview from 12 p.m. on GB News. Just revisiting that story in relation to hate crimes, it is a fascinating one, because I've talked about it, and we've talked about it a lot on different shows on GB News. And on the one hand, any kind of hate crime or any targeting of people based off of various different characteristics, whether that's sexuality or race, is unacceptable. But on the other hand, sometimes I do worry that there is an encouragement for people to perceive disagreement, interaction that doesn't necessarily go their way within a hate crime framework. And we have seen that, for example, feminists, gender-critical feminists that disagree with the idea of gender identity are often reported for a hate crime. So I think that whilst these statistics are really important and we should look into them, I think that we should also think about the different causes and factors that might be at play here. Well, coming up, it's To The Point with Bev Turner, but first, it's the weather.
Morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A blustery day again today, but not quite as windy as yesterday. Many places dry and bright with sunny spells, but some places seeing showers. Broadly speaking, it's low pressure to the north, high pressure to the south, and plenty of isobars in between. The closer the isobars, the stronger the wind, so the stiffest winds today will be across northern Scotland, where there'll be plenty of showers. Quite a lot of clouds spilling into North Wales, northwest England this morning. A little bit of rain likely at times here, particularly around the middle part of the day. Much of southern England, eastern England, the Midlands and northeast Scotland dry and bright with some good spells of sunshine. As I said, still a bit breezy, but not as windy as yesterday. And we'll see showers, particularly for Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland this afternoon. Temperature-wise, generally a touch above average, a little bit warmer than yesterday. Obviously feeling a bit cooler because it's still breezy, but in the sunny spells in the southeast, 19 degrees is likely. Through this evening, I think we'll see the rain pepping up a little bit more across western parts of Scotland, and this line of rain then tracks southwards into Northern Ireland through the early hours. A few showers coming into the Midlands, parts of Wales and southern England too. A fairly mild night, certainly compared to the one just gone. And then we'll into Friday, which will again be a mixture of sunshine and showers, but with also thrown into the mix this band of rain which is sinking southwards. Certainly we'll see a few more showers tomorrow across parts of southern England, the Midlands, South Wales, but still some decent breaks in the cloud and some sunshine. That band of rain pushing south initially for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, into northern England, Wales, and by the end of the day into the Midlands and South Wales. Could be quite heavy, but it should move through. Behind that, tomorrow, again, we'll see a mixture of sunshine and showers and a slightly cooler feel. Can't completely rule out the odd shower in the northwest on Saturday, but at the moment, most places look like being dry and bright on Saturday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Very good morning. Thank you for tuning in to GB News with me, Bev Turner, on your TV, radio and online. This morning, Liz Truss has hot-footed it from Birmingham's Tory conference to Prague to hang out with other European leaders as part of a brand new club. Why does this make me nervous? We will find out more. We're going to have voices from the left and the right assessing how Number 10 is doing after conference. And as the official COVID handling inquiry begins, I'll talk to two heavy hitters in the fight for answers to see if they are optimistic about its outcome. Plus, of course, your input, please, on GBViews at gbnews.uk. All of that is coming up after this morning's top news stories with Rhiannon.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Police in Thailand say at least 34 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a gunman opened fire at a child daycare centre. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. In a statement, the police say the gunman was a former officer. Local media are reporting he's since killed himself and his family. The Prime Minister is heading to a summit in Prague this morning for an historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. Liz Truss will call for European unity and address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. She'll say Europe is facing its biggest crisis since the Second World War following Russian aggression. Liz Truss will also hold talks with her French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. The Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over pay. They're calling for an above-inflation increase. It's amid warnings that record numbers of nurses are leaving the industry. The RCN's General Secretary says it's a once-in-a-generation chance to improve staff shortages and nurses' pay. The result of the ballot is due early next month. Meanwhile, around 500 emergency call handlers have joined a BT Group walkout today in a dispute over pay. The Communication Workers Union, which represents BT workers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU says the position has changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. A further 3 days of walkouts are planned to take place later this month. The union's General Secretary Dave Ward told GB News BT are upping the ante.
I mean, it cannot be right that call centre workers earning between £21,000 and £27,000 a year are having to go on strike. They're at a tipping point. The actual situation with BT is that they are refusing to negotiate. They've had 2.5 weeks' notice of this dispute. We would rather be in a room sitting with them today trying to get this dispute resolved than being out on strike.
The Chancellor will meet with UK banks and building societies later amid rising mortgage rates following the mini-budget last month. Kwasi Kwarteng will attempt to calm executives ahead of his plans to loosen market regulation in financial services. A number of high street lenders, including HSBC, Santander and Virgin Money, have withdrawn products for new borrowers after the mini-budget. The typical rate for a 2-year fixed mortgage has risen above 6% for the first time in 14 years. At least 16 women have died in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Lesbos. The country's Coast Guard says it's the second maritime disaster involving migrants in less than a day. The boat was carrying around 40 people. 9 have been rescued so far. A search is underway for 15 still missing. At least 2 people have been killed in Ukraine's southern city of Zaporizhia. Ukrainian officials say Russian rockets hit residential buildings overnight. The city's one of 4 Ukrainian regions annexed by Russia. Kyiv says it'll never accept the illegal seizure of its territory by force, which has been condemned by Ukraine's allies. Meanwhile, President Zelensky claims Ukraine's counteroffensive is continuing to gain ground as 3 more villages in Kherson are liberated. Kevin Spacey is due to appear in a US court to face an allegation he sexually assaulted a boy 36 years ago. Actor Anthony Rapp claims he was the victim of an unwanted sexual advance at a party in 1986 when he was 14 years old. The trial comes less than 3 months after the Oscar-winning actor appeared in a UK court where he faces a separate 5 charges of sexual assault. Mr. Spacey denies all of the accusations against him. And the NHS has issued an urgent call for more black blood donors. It says a record level of blood donations is now needed every day to treat people with sickle cell disease, particularly common in people with African or Caribbean heritage. Demand for blood to treat the disease has risen by around 67% over the past 5 years. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the point with Beth.
Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Whether you're watching on the TV, listening on your radio, or looking at us on the very nifty little app, I am Bev Turner. We've got a busy and brilliant show for you today with everything you need to know about what's going on in the world. Prime Minister Liz Truss has jetted away from Tory party conference to a gathering of European leaders. I'm going to be talking to two former Number 10 insiders to assess how satisfied the Conservatives will be with her performance at conference. Thousands of BT workers will go on strike today, including hundreds of 999 emergency call operators. I need to know if this strike is justified, or should BT bosses care more about their workers and less about their shareholders? And this weekend's big fight between Conor Ben and Chris Eubank Jr. looks like it will be cancelled after Ben tested positive for a banned substance best known as a female fertility drug. I'm going to be talking to world champion Carl Frampton to find out about this rather bizarre story. We've got all of that coming up and much more across the programme. You can get in touch with your views as usual as well. I will get to as many as I can on GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, you never have a quiet moment when you're Prime Minister, it seems, and Liz Truss is now arriving in Prague for the first ever meeting of the European Political Community. A leaders' summit aimed at cooperation between European nations. The PM will urge the assembled leaders to discuss the issues of energy and migration. She'll also hold bilateral talks with French President Emmanuel Macron. Her trip follows a keynote speech at the end of a turbulent Conservative Party conference in which she hit out at a so-called anti-growth coalition. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, has the details.
Liz Truss arrived in Birmingham after a torrid first month in office. And for the first 3 days of conference, it only seemed to get worse. So her speech was an attempt to reset, to win over critics inside the party and out.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth.
The Prime Minister was interrupted by Greenpeace protesters asking who had voted for her changes. But it only seemed to unite members in the hall.
It's always more taxes, more regulation and more meddling. Wrong, wrong, wrong.
It's just a month since Liz Truss became Prime Minister, but already we've seen accusations of coups, cabinet splits, and even talk about Truss's very survival as PM. Will this speech be enough to turn things around? This is how it went down with members.
She showed she knows what she's talking about. She got them in her hand after about 5 minutes, and then she just grew and grew and grew.
I think she did very well, yeah. No cheese speech moments. It was really good. I was a bit worried, but no, I think she did a great job.
Brilliant, absolutely fantastic, much better than I expected. Before I was a bit worried, but now I feel very reassured.
Birmingham has provided a platform for those who disagree with the PM. Her speech might help win some of them back. But as she scurried to Westminster, she will need to prove she has the strategy and steel to survive. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Going to be looking at that in a little bit bit more detail in just a moment, actually, with somebody from the left and somebody from the right, both of whom have experience of working in Number 10. But first of all, let's think about this this conference that's going on in Prague, this gathering. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is there for us. Good morning, Darren. You've had a busy time as well. You must have been chasing Liz Truss around aeroplanes, I think, in the last 24 hours. Now, what is this new European community? Have we heard much about it? What do we know about it? And why would our PM want to be a part of it?
So it's really fascinating, all of this. This is new. This is the inaugural meeting here in Prague of the European Political Community. And it is essentially a kind of Emmanuel Macron idea. His kind of big thought process is that there are lots of really big global issues, and actually Europe needs to reassert itself on the global stage, if you like, beyond the European Union. Now, there are 27 members of the European Union, but actually today there's going to be 44 nation states, presidents and prime ministers. And it's not just Liz Truss from outside of the EU is going to be here, but President Erdogan of Turkey, the Norwegian Prime Minister. We've got some of the Balkan countries, some of the Caucasus like Azerbaijan here as well. 44, as I say, in total, notably, of course, Belarus and Russia not among them. And the idea is to talk about kind of the big political issues that actually just face the continent. So clearly they are the war in Ukraine, and President Zelensky is going to dial in, if you like, a little later on to address leaders. In addition to that, energy security, clearly that is a big concern to pretty much every single European Union or European country. Interestingly, as I say, Norway is here, and Norway's got massive gas reserves, is a big supplier of that to Europe, but also to us in the UK. And Liz Truss made it clear, didn't she, during that speech yesterday, Bev, that she wants to kind of sign these long-term deals to ensure that we don't see a repeat of this winter in the years to come. And then there's migration, and you've heard there in the news bulletin, dozens more people have died of Lesbos in Greece trying to get in to Europe. And whether you're concerned about migration or not, whether you're concerned about the small boats crisis or not, this is not just a problem or an issue facing the UK. And with the UK wanting to stem those migrants coming in, clearly it's going to have to cooperate with the rest of Europe, not least of all France, given that it's one of our closest neighbours. And Liz Truss this week, when I was speaking to her, was kind of putting that point across, that the reason she's here is a kind of recognition that actually when these big kind of global issues are being talked about, she wants to be at the table. She wants to have her voice heard. Now, people will be a little bit suspicious about that. Clearly, they'll be concerned when Emmanuel Macron's behind it if it's going to become more of a political project. But for the time being, the kind of change in tone, if you like, from the UK government is we want to re-engage, we want to get talking to these European leaders. And she's even suggested that potentially that Europe could host the next summit within the next 6 months.
Darren, if I could just ask you a question. Is this sort of EU light we're looking at here? What are the members who are there today? And how many days does this go on for a start as well? But will the members of the EU think this is a good idea, or does it seem this sort of collaboration to be a threat, perhaps, to the aims of the official EU organisation?
Yeah, you know what, it's really difficult because it's such early days. You know, there is a thought process that, you know, is Emmanuel Macron trying to essentially create EU 2.0, kind of a slightly slower, slightly softer version of the EU. I'm not entirely sure that's true. I think this is just an attempt, and we see this in different parts of the world when, like, the American leaders meet, and when I say America, I mean North and South America, and you get it in the Pacific as well. So I'm not entirely sure it is. I think it's just kind of these countries coming together to talk about issues that affect them all. And also when you've got like Turkey and Azerbaijan, and you've also got Norway and the UK, I mean, to think that politically they're all going to be on the same page and everything, and they're going to club together in some EU fashion seems a bit far-fetched, I would suggest, at the moment. In saying that, it is also a chance for her to talk to these leaders individually. She's going to have a bilateral meeting with Emmanuel Macron, with the Dutch Prime Minister as well, maybe even with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President. And she has made clear, and Downing Street have been very clear about this, you know, they are taking this as they see it. They're going to approach it kind of in a well-meaning fashion, but if they fear it's going off in a certain direction, they may roll back from it. And that's why today is really fascinating. And to answer your first question, it is just today, right, i.e. The leaders are meeting today. She's going to leave later on tonight. There is an EU summit here tomorrow. Of course, lots of the leaders aren't part of it, but it is a kind of in and out job, if you like. She's due to arrive in the next hour. She'll be gone by kind of 9, 10 o'clock tonight.
Good, because she's got work to do, frankly. Thank you, Darren. So have you. Darren McCaffrey there, who will no doubt let us know what happens there at the European Political Community Summit. Let me know what you think, GBviews at gbnews.uk. Now, to chew through the aftermath of the Tory Party conference, I'm joined now by former Boris Johnson advisor Tim Montgomery and former Tony Blair advisor John McTernan. Good morning, gentlemen. Lovely to see you both again. Can I just, first of all, going back to that story we've just seen Darren talking about there, Tim, if I can start with you. The European political community, good idea?
I think it's always a good idea, Bev, if leaders around the world talk to each other. You know, we even have to talk to our enemies. You know, that's what Ronald Reagan did when he was president of the United States. He called the Soviet Union the evil empire, yet he still talked to them. And that's how we got some of the arms treaty negotiations that succeeded. So absolutely, we should be talking with our friends. You know, we left the European Union because we want to be part of a structure that told us what to do on things like immigration and taxes. But I think it's still important that the European nations, they're our friends, they're our allies still. We still cooperate with them in organisations like NATO, and we should still talk to them in organisations the kind that President Macron seems to be pioneering.
OK, super. Thank you, Tim. Right, John, let's reflect a little. I'm sure you were watching the Tory party conference. I bet you didn't miss a moment of it, did you? Now, how was it for you as a former advisor to Tony Blair? Did you sit there in delight, the fact that it started off with this quite embarrassing U-turn from Kwasi Kwarteng and they weren't sure what the relationship was like between the two of them? What did you make of it all by the end of the week?
Well, we always thought before Tony's speech at the conference he had to speak to the whole country because Labour governed for the whole country. And what you saw in Tory party conference this week was that Liz Truss doesn't even govern the whole of her party or the whole of her cabinet. The extraordinary disunity when Suella Braverman calls the campaign to reverse the higher rate of tax, a coup, when you have cabinet ministers disagreeing about operating benefits. All of this goes to show a party at each other's throats, not caring about the country, not focusing on the country. And in the end, the PM's speech was directed at calming her base, calming the conference, speaking to her MPs. It was a speech noticeably not aimed at the country at all. And it's the one chance you get every year to speak directly to the country as the leader of your party. So, at the moment, things are terrible for the country. This government is terrible for the country, but it's all great for the Labour Party.
Tim, it was a conference then of division. Do you agree?
Well, unfortunately, it was a conference of division. It's hard to argue with what John has just said, unfortunately, as much as I would like to. The defence, I think, of Liz Truss is that Britain does have a growth problem. Our trend rate of growth over the last couple of decades under both the Labour government that John supported and the Conservative governments that I've supported has been too low. And so Liz Truss's fundamental mission to get Britain moving, as the conference slogan said, is the right one. I think the problem with what she has done is it was obviously the mini budget was badly executed. And I don't think there's been a proper acknowledgement by her, and I don't think it happened in yesterday's speech, that while her mission may be a very good one, it wasn't what was emphasised to the British people at the last general election. So she only has a limited mandate for it. And therefore, she really has to work harder at taking us all with her. She has to work harder at taking her parliamentary party with her, and she has to work harder at taking the country with her.
Is it just about hard work, though, John? Does she have the personality, the charisma, the good communication skills to take all of those people along with her, no matter how hard she works?
Look, I think we had in Boris Johnson one of the great political characters, a man of great communication skills, huge charisma, and I think both Keir Starmer and Liz Truss in their different ways are a reaction to that. I think we may well, Michael Gove said you've had enough of experts. I think we may have had enough of characters as our prime ministers, and maybe we just need people who put things straightforwardly, simply, clearly, and allow the public a choice. I think the difficulty for Liz Truss is the real world. And today we see fixed rate mortgages on the market at 6%. They were 2.3% before Christmas. 3,000 households come off fixed rate mortgages every day in the UK, and they're facing an average hike of £400 or £500 a month in mortgage repayments. There's nothing that can be done about that now by the government. They create the situation where long-term interests are being driven up far faster in the UK than anywhere else in the world. And those circumstances are going to be brutal. The drumbeat over the next 12 months, 2 years, is going to be of higher interest rates, higher mortgage repayments, and people not being able to buy the house they want. I think it's going to be a grim, and it dwarfs the energy bills, which we know people were fearing. And I think it's at the heart of the threat to the home-owning democracy. The thing that Keir said Labour's now in favour of. Labour were stealing Thatcher's clothes while the Tory party were tearing themselves apart.
OK, gentlemen, we need to move on. Thank you. Nice to talk to both of you. John McTurnan there and Tim Montgomery. Let me know what you think as well, would you? GBviews at gbnews.uk. And coming up, actually, in just a moment, Prime Minister Truss talked about taking on the so-called anti-growth coalition. We heard our guests talk about it there. So who are holding back Britain's potential? And what is she doing to help our motorists? They are quite literally our economy's engine of growth, aren't they? Anyone who drives a car, you want to listen to this. We're going to be talking about that after a short break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. It is at 10:23. Thank you for joining me, Bev Turner, on GB News, live on your TV, online and radio. You have been getting in touch. Barry has said the Conservatives have had 12 years of power. In that time, we lost over 20,000 police officers and 40,000 nurses and still counting. Brian says, who are these everyone who believes that we need to get away from oil and gas? Nobody I know believes that for 1 second. This is the usual minority ruling the narrative yet again. Now, on that topic, in her speech to the Tory Party conference yesterday, Liz Truss, who I think actually did a fairly decent job of that speech, identified a new enemy. She called them the Anti-Growth Coalition, who are apparently enemies of enterprise that are holding back British people from unleashing their full potential. Let's have a listen.
They don't understand the British people. They don't understand aspiration. They are prepared to leave our towns and cities facing decline. My friends, does the Anti-Growth Coalition have any idea who pays their wages? It's the people who make things in factories across our country. It's the people who get up at the crack of dawn to go to work. It's the commuters who get trains into towns and cities across our country. I'm thinking of the white van drivers, the hairdressers, the plumbers, the accountants, the IT workers, and millions of others up and down the UK. The Anti-Growth Coalition just doesn't get it. It's because they don't face the same challenges as normal working people. These enemies of enterprise don't know the frustration you feel to see your road blocked by protesters or your train.
I was taking notes then. Welcome back. Fighting talk that from the Prime Minister, wasn't it? But what did she offer to drivers? Because actually, I'm joined now by Howard Cox from Fair Fuel UK campaign. Good morning, Howard. I was just taking in what she was saying there. And actually, when she's talking about white van drivers, hairdressers, normal working people, I don't know about you, but I was thinking, well, a lot of these people need a car or a van. Was there enough in her speech for you and the campaign that you want to see to help people who wish to drive motorised vehicles on the road?
Well, there's two answers to that question. One is I agree with you. I didn't think she did too badly with the speech yesterday, considering the pressure she's under and the carping. And she's only been in the job for days. And we need to give her a chance. And we certainly don't need another leadership election coming on. But the second part, which is the serious point, which I've been campaigning for a long time, drivers are always an afterthought, except when it comes to budget, when they know they can rely on them being the reliable cash cows to deliver £34 billion of fuel duty and VAT, always reliably. So, no, there was nothing for the drivers yesterday. And what is really worrying, and this is the thing that we must get across to the government, is that you mentioned it, they are the commercial heartbeat of the economy. We cannot live without logistics, with distribution and travelling to work, travelling to hospitals, travelling to colleges, all those sorts of things. Outside of the urban areas, particularly in rural areas, people cannot survive without a car. And I'm afraid, or a van, etc. And at the moment, with the price of fuel still at ridiculously high levels, and it's set to go up higher because the OPEC countries have decided now to cut production, which means pump prices are going to go up again. And what with the weaker pound combination as well, things don't look too good. And what the government must do is to cut fuel duty, because that would really spark a massive growth in the economy, reduce inflation, and really reduce the problems of the cost of living crisis too.
When she talks about this anti-growth coalition, Howard, she was talking about some of the people we're watching on the TV now, these protesters who don't mind disrupting everyday life. Were you surprised, Howard Cox, to see Greenpeace there with their banner? I mean, I don't know how they got in. I imagine it's fairly easy. But were you surprised to see those sorts of people protesting?
Well, I'm never surprised to see them there. I mean, it's pathetic what we're seeing. And they are the archetypal environmental sort of campaigners. They just don't get it, do they? That most of the Greenpeace drivers actually drive a car. Most of them drive a fossil fuel car too, which is really incredible irony. I see it all the time. I get abused on social media. I've had death threats. I've had feces thrown through my front door, letterbox, all those sorts of things, all because I'm just trying to get a lower cost of living. And I happen to support fossil fuels, but I also support clean fuel. And we should be allowing clean fuel technology to evolve organically rather than being forced into cliff edge targets. And I'm about to publish a report regarding the 2030 ban that we've been inflicted upon without any consultation. And that's going to be an eye-opening report.
Howard, let me ask you about this drive towards, no pun intended, electric vehicles, because from what I can see, we're not quite ready for them yet. The number of friends I've had who've had to sit on a motorway services for 90 minutes when they were, rushing to pick up the kids from somewhere, and it's just, they seem to be laden with inconvenience at the moment.
You're absolutely right. I mean, let's be clear. Electric vehicle technology is incredible. I've actually driven them. I drive a hybrid. They are great stuff. But we're not ready for them. And we shouldn't be forced into actually trying to us to change from fossil fuels to electric vehicles without everything in place. The national grid won't be able to cope. And you imagine actually charging an electric vehicle if you're in the fourth floor of a block of flats, with an extension lead hanging out the window, all those sorts of things. And you're right, the range anxiety is a problem still, and the recycling. And we've got another report. I've just mentioned one report regarding the 2030 ban. We've got another report, cradle to grave comparisons of emissions from electric vehicles compared to diesel and petrol cars. That's cradle to grave from when they're manufactured all the way through to disposal, etc. And we're learning now that the cost of running an electric vehicle is not much different to a petrol and diesel vehicle if you use public charging points, something like 19 to 20p per mile on both types of fuels. And that can't be acceptable, and it can't be an attraction. And of course, the other little thing is electric vehicles are much more expensive.
Yeah. Howard, every time I talk to you, you make me realise I'm not the only person that thinks the world has gone completely mad. But please keep up the fair fight, won't you? I know there's a lot of people, some people might be doing horrendous things to you on a personal level, but a lot of people do support what you're trying to do to move this forward in a way that involves common sense. It means we can all still get around in the way that we want to do. Thank you so much. And let us know when you have your report 2030. I would love to talk to you about that then as well. Howard Cox there from Fair Fuel UK. Now, after the break, you know this massive fight that is on posters everywhere, this boxing match between Conor Ben, son of Nigel Ben, and Chris Eubank Jr. Well, it's in doubt after Ben tested positive for a banned substance, but I'll tell you what that banned substance was when you come back, because it is very odd. And I'm going to be asking whether boxing needs to clean up its act. Is this a problem? I'm going to be talking to world champion Carl Frampton. But before that, a look at this morning's news.
Good morning, it's 10:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Police in Thailand say at least 34 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a gunman opened fire at a childcare centre. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. Thai police say the gunman was a former officer discharged from the police force last year. They've confirmed he killed himself, his wife and his child during the mass shooting. The Prime Minister is at a summit in Prague today for an historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. Liz Truss will call for European unity and address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. She'll say Europe is facing its biggest crisis since the Second World War following Russian aggression. Liz Truss will also hold talks with her French counterpart Emmanuel Macron in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. The Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over pay. They're demanding an above-inflation increase. The RCN's General Secretary says it's a once-in-a-generation chance to improve staff shortages and nurses' pay. The result of the ballot is due early next month. Meanwhile, 500 emergency call handlers are set to join a BT Group walkout today. The Communication Workers Union, which represents BT workers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU said the position had changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. Further walkouts are planned later this month. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1306 and €1.1425. The price of gold is £1,517.15 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,044 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Very good morning to you. It's 10:36 on Thursday. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner on GB News. Do let me know what you think about what's going on in the world today. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Shana said if Truss is getting stage acting and costume advice, it is working from boring and flat to front stage and centre strong. Any Prime Minister must be able to act, perform and pull a joke. A lot of you think she did pretty well yesterday, so keep those comments coming in, won't you? Now, thousands of BT workers will go on strike today due to a dispute over pay, including 400 emergency call operators. BT said it would do whatever it takes to protect 999 services by moving staff to cover emergency calls. Our reporter, Rosie Wright, is at the BT Tower this morning. Hi, Rosie. I don't think I can remember a time when 999 callers have gone on strike. Is this a first?
What it is unprecedented, Beverly, and it's action that the strikers say they didn't want to have to take. They say they've been forced to up the ante and now involve 999 call handlers because they don't feel like they're being heard. To just give you some of the numbers, it's about 40,000 staff walking out today, and for lots of them, this is their third set of strikes. 30,000 people who do technicians and 10,000 call operators, and what is different and what is new, as you've just laid out, is those emergency service workers joining in, the 999 call operators. Now, BT have said this is reckless action. We've tried to negotiate with you. We've actually given you a pay deal which we think is fair. They say it represents for the average worker about a 5% pay increase. They say that's the biggest increase they've done in the last 20 years. Well, I asked the General Secretary of the Workers' Union to find out why they're going on strike and why that isn't enough. This is what he had to say.
Let's be honest, BT, rather than negotiate, chose to use their managers today and train up agency workers to cover these roles. So they did that rather than refuse to negotiate. We could have suspended the strike if they'd have come to the table with fresh proposals. Why do we believe that they can afford a decent pay rise for workers? Well, they made £1.3 billion last year. They awarded shareholders over £750 million, and the CEO took a 32% increase in pay, taking his pay to £3.5 million. Now, you'll understand, against that background, why our members are so fed up of the way they're being treated with utter contempt. And I can't emphasise enough here that some of these workers are so important to society. We understand that. It's an incredibly difficult decision for them today. But why is it that these people at the top of businesses, it's like a disease up and down the whole of the UK, of arrogance, of greed, of hypocrisy? They should be in the room negotiating a solution to this dispute.
Well, what do some of the workers think directly? Let's find out, because Pete Francis has come off the picket line very briefly just to talk to me. You work in this building normally. Yep. Why today you stood outside rather than inside?
Well, it's basically I'm here because of all my fellow members and my colleagues is due to the imposition of the company of not trying to negotiate with the CWU to come up with a fair pay deal for us.
What would be fair? Because BT say we've offered £1,500 flat rate for some people, the people on the lowest income. That represents an 8% pay rise. If that's not fair, what would be?
Right. Well, apart from I don't think they're telling you the full truth about the 8%, and they're not really not many people are getting that 8%. But what would represent one is we haven't actually even said what we're after. Obviously, we're looking for something round about the inflation rate, and I know the company has said it's the biggest rise they've given in 20 years, but we're facing the highest inflation in 40 years. So, you know, it's the imposition of the company that's upsetting most of the membership, that they're not negotiating with the CW, and that's what we're asking them to do, just negotiate.
They've said they are still open to discussion and they're very keen to keep that communication open. How do you feel? This is the third time that you've been part of these set of strikes. They are more serious this time round with the inclusion of those 999 call handlers going off on strike. Do you personally feel comfortable with that?
Well, the reason they never came out on strike before is because obviously we exempt them because we know of the priority type of work that they do. I don't think the company are being truthful with the press because they are not negotiating with us. And if they were negotiating, they would have still been at work now.
Well, I can put some of those questions directly to BT. Pete, thank you very much for speaking to me out on the picket line today. Now, this is one strike, the third round of strikes, and there are many more to come. On the 10th, on the 20th and the 24th of this month, the people behind me say, we're going to keep on striking, and they're asking for support just like that, for people to beep their horns as they go past, until we get more of a demand that we want from BT. BT say the pay offer for this year is closed. In April, we gave you that pay rise. You can have it. It's there for the taking. We're open to talking, but we're not budging on that number just yet.
OK, thank you, Rosie. Thank you very much. Well, this BT says I think we're going to be looking at a winter of multiple strikes, aren't we? Right, now, Brazil's election is going into a second round of elections in which socialist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, otherwise known as Lula, will face the incumbent president Bolsonaro. Lula won 48% against Bolsonaro's 43%, a much closer result than opinion polls had suggested. But Lula fell short of the more than 50% of valid votes needed to prevent a runoff. Voters now have 4 weeks to decide which of the two should lead Brazil. So, helping me to understand this in a little more detail is journalist and author of Beef, Bible and Bullets, Brazil in the Age of Bolsonaro, Richard Lapper. Good morning, Richard. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, there may not be that many people who are watching who are familiar with the Brazilian constitutional system. So just explain the backstory of how this works and why this is important right now.
Well, I think simply it's important because this is another election where the strength and support that right-wing populists enjoy has been underestimated by opinion polls. We saw this in Britain with Brexit. We saw it with Donald Trump in the US. We've seen it in numerous other elections. And here we've seen polls consistently over a period of 18 months showing Bolsonaro to be on the road to a very clear defeat. And now we have a final election. Brazil's a complicated election system, simply enough. 2 rounds, all the candidates in the first round, the top 2 runoff. That's at the end of October. And now it looks as though Bolsonaro, who's been trailing in the polls, has got a great chance to win at the end of this month. And this is the big surprise, really.
What I think you've identified there, Richard, and I totally agree with you in terms of this underestimation of the right-wing support for leaders like this. If you looked at the mainstream media, I was particularly reading an article in The Guardian that was portraying this result as absolutely devastating for global politics if Bolsonaro keeps that seat. But if you go onto social media and you go onto Twitter and Instagram and other outlets at which normal people can curate their content, it's been clear for quite a long time, there's been a lot of support for Bolsonaro. Is that part of the problem? You've got this different in media portrayals?
I think there's some of that. I mean, Brazil's very, very polarized. Yeah, I'm in my own. I'm married to a Brazilian. My own family is hugely divided about this. So this is not just about social media, but also I think that many Bolsonaristas who are kind of shy about their support, and they tend to be quite conspiratorial too. They see the sort of liberal establishment in Brazil conspiring against Bolsonaro. And I think they're sometimes unwilling to take part in opinion polls and express their views. It's a kind of vote.
Do you think it's also the fact that with that kind of mindset and that sort of ideological thinking, What Bolsonaro has said during the last couple of years has been very much pro-Brazil, anti-globalist agenda. And perhaps people fear that the left-wing candidate, that Lula, is more part of that globalist elite, a sort of cabal that people feel is exerting influence, which maybe they are not being entirely informed about.
Well, there's an element of that, but I think the key thing, if you look at Brazil at the moment, is Brazil's had a terrible time in the last 4 years. We've had massive falls in the standard of living, and we're obviously suffering from that in Britain, but inflation. But I mean, Brazilians on average earn £500 a month, and you go round Sao Paulo, where I am now, and the prices are London levels, if not higher. So poorer people in Brazil, and we're talking about 2/3 of the population here, are really suffering. And the surprise, and of course, the pandemic here was devastating. A death rate in excess of ours, which was pretty high, and pretty much in line with the US. So I think these, for most people, these are the big issues. The talk of globalization, there is a culture war going on in Brazil as elsewhere, but the really big issue is the economic issue. And I think it's still most likely that Lula, who, he's a trade unionist and has a record of having actually done quite well in his first two governments, will win the election at the end of the month.
What will they both try to do now between now and the end of the month? Who will they recruit, and what messages will they try and get out?
I think that they're going to be going to the centre ground, to the ground of economic responsibility. They're going to be showing their credentials to a lot of Brazilians who voted for neither of these candidates. So we had two centre candidates who got about 7% of the vote, and 30 million people, 20% of the electorate, who didn't vote at all. And voting's mandatory, by the way, in Brazil, so it's illegal not to vote. So there's a lot of people who can be pulled into this election. Bolsonaro and Lula will be aiming at those voters who are disillusioned with politics in general.
OK. Thank you so much, Richard. We will have you back on as this unfolds. I'm particularly fascinated how a northern man ends up living in Sao Paulo, so I'll ask you that next time, because we haven't had time today. So I'll speak to you again soon. All right, thank you, Richard, thank you. OK, now, quickly, Chris Eubank versus Nigel Ben. For many of us growing up, this was the best British boxing rivalry of a generation, wasn't it? Well, this Saturday, their offspring, their sons, Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Ben, were set to have it out in the ring. However, tests by the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association found that Ben tested positive for a trace amounts of a banned substance. The British Boxing Board of Control, the UK's governing body, said the fight was, quote, prohibited, as it is not in the interest of boxing, but it could still apparently go ahead. Promoter Eddie Hearn has said Mr. Ben has not been charged with any rule violation. If you're wondering what that was about, there was a children's programme called Mr. Ben where somebody used to go into a dressing room and come out as somebody else. But anyway, he's not suspended, apparently. He remains free to fight. And the decision on whether the fight could go ahead was with the lawyers. So how can a fight still go ahead when one of the fighters has tested positive for a banned substance? Let us get our head around this and see what is going on. So I'm delighted to be joined by 2 times world boxing champion, Carl Frampton, MBE. Good morning, Carl. Great to talk to you. First of all, give us an idea. How big was this fight going to be?
It's a massive fight. It was a fight that I was looking forward to ever since it was announced. It was kind of hard to believe that the fight was going to take place at one point because of the difference in weight. One's really a welterweight and the other guy is a middleweight. But obviously with the reputation and the backstory of the dads having fought before, it caught the public's imagination. It certainly caught my imagination as well. And it was a fight that I was extremely, extremely excited about.
So remind me, so one of them would normally fight in a lower category, one of them would fight in a heavier category, and remind me which one had to lose weight and which one had to put weight on.
So Chris Eubank Jr. has fought as a middleweight, so he was the bigger guy. He's fought up at super middleweight as well, so he was coming down to a weight division called light middleweight. Conor Ben was coming up from welterweight to light middleweight. So Chris Eubank was the favourite in the fight and the bigger man in the fight as well.
Right. So do you know, Carl, what the drug is that Ben tested positive for and why he might have been taking it?
I don't know a lot about it. I found out about it once we heard about this news breaking yesterday, and I looked into it and done a little bit of research. And it's a fertility drug used for females, really. But when I looked at the benefits it can have for males, apparently in small amounts it can increase testosterone by up to 200%. And doing a little bit more research, I'm not saying this is exactly what's going on, but a lot of bodybuilders use it after they've come off a steroid cycle to kind of increase testosterone again. So it's something that should never be found in a boxer system, no matter how big or how small the traces are.
Have we had a statement from Ben at the moment to respond to this positive test?
I think there was after the news broke yesterday, there was a public workout where he done a bit of a pad session for some public and the media, and he's made a kind of statement saying he's done nothing wrong, and a bit of bluster really, but he has done something wrong. He's tested positive with a performance enhancing drug in his system, and the fact that we're still talking about this fight potentially happening is an absolute farce, and it's just another kind of black mark against boxing's name.
Is doping a big issue in boxing? I know we've seen over the years various sports have been tainted by this, particularly I'm thinking cycling, some Olympic athletics have had a problem with it, swimming even. But I don't think it's the kind of thing I've heard a lot about in boxing over the years.
Well, it happens, and if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago, how rife is doping in the sport, I would have said it's probably not happening that much. I'm sure there's guys have been caught numerous times and get kind of small fines, depending much more or bans, depending on how much money you can bring to the table. But a few years ago I would have said no, but now I'm starting to think it's a lot more rife than I would like to believe, if I'm being honest. And the difference between the other sports that you mentioned, cycling and swimming and athletics, is boxing is a very dangerous sport. And, there's been fatalities in the ring. It doesn't happen very often, but there has been fatalities and there has been serious brain injury and stuff as well. And the fact that it's a hard enough game, but to be fighting against someone who has got performance enhancing drugs in their system, it's a disgrace, really. And I think anybody involved in that really need to take a good hard look at themselves. I don't think they should be allowed in the sport again.
That is such a good point, Carl. I hadn't really thought of it like that. It is the sport of gentlemen, isn't it? You go in there and you have to trust each other that you're bringing into the ring your training, your preparation, but nothing chemical that might give you an unfair and therefore dangerous advantage. What do you think the chances are of this fight going ahead at the weekend, and what would the implications of that be?
I think it may still go ahead, but you've got to ask the question then, what is the point in these anti-doping organisations? He's tested positive for a drug, and because this fight, it brings in so much revenue because there's so much attention around it for sponsorship and ticket sales and pay-per-view buys. People will want this fight to happen. If it does, it's an absolute farce. The British Board of Control have come out and says that they are prohibiting the fight. But what the promoter can do is go to another sanctioning body and get a Luxembourg or Malta or Czech Republic, which has happened before, and have it under their their control in Britain. And it just asks the question: what is the point in these anti-doping associations when people are testing positive and the fight can still take place? If this was a fight that didn't generate as much money, it would have been pushed aside, and people would have made an example out of the fighter involved. But because there's such huge interest to it and there's so much money to be made, it potentially will go ahead, and it's a shame.
Yeah. Carl, thank you. I've loved talking to you. I think that's such a fascinating insight as well. Thank you so much. And we'll see. Maybe you can come back next week if the fight does go ahead on Saturday and let us know what you made of it. Carl Frampton, former 2 times world champion boxer. What a nightmare it is for everybody, like they said, for the organisations, the channels, the Boxing Federation, and not least Eubank Jr. as well. Right, keep your thoughts coming in to me. Let me know what you think about that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll be back with you with more of today's top stories, including my monologue on the COVID inquiry after this quick weather break.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. For many, a fine, bright day out there today. There's a fair bit of cloud across parts of south of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and a few showers likely here. It's quite breezy as well, but not as windy as yesterday. Low pressure dominant to the north. High pressure, though, controlling things further south, which means much of southern England, South Wales, won't see many showers at all. Staying dry and bright here, and the same goes for much of eastern England and northeast Scotland. It's further north and west where we've got more cloud and some outbreaks of rain pushing into North Wales and northwest England, across Northern Ireland and parts of western Scotland. A mixture of sunshine and blustery showers across the far north. In the sunny spells further south, well, temperatures getting up into the high teens, 20 Celsius is just about possible. Generally, we're looking at 16 or 17 the high. Through this evening, I think we'll see a bit more rain just moving through the central belt of Scotland, so turning fairly damp here. In fact, right across Scotland, there'll be outbreaks of rain for much of the night. Could be quite heavy, especially through the early hours, and we'll see rain returning to Northern Ireland as well overnight. Again, much of England and Wales staying dry. A milder night than last night. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures. On to the details for Friday, and we'll be watching this band of rain as it sinks south. It's going to be quite heavy, starting off across southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, heading quite quickly into northern England, then into parts of Wales. Either side of that, reasonably bright skies and just a few showers. But as this sinks southwards, could turn into quite a lively line of heavy rain, not lasting too long, but intense rain and squally winds where they just suddenly pick up over parts of the Midlands, Lincolnshire, South Wales and southwest England come the afternoon. Eventually getting into East Anglia in the southeast for Friday evening's rush hour. M25 could see a lot of rain in a short space of time. Following on from that, we'll see plenty of showers packing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. Into the weekend, though, the showers fading. Many places looking dry on Saturday. We are expecting some rain on Sunday, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me or sticking with me. It's 11 o'clock on Thursday morning. You are watching Bev Turner on GB News. You're listening to me as well. We've got a fantastic second hour. If you think the first hour was good, just wait for this one. It's going to be fantastic. I've got Maya Tozy coming on to talk about the Iranian protests and remarkable footage of teenage girls pulling off their headscarves. I'm going to be talking all about the latest in Ukraine, what is going on there, rail strikes as well. You want to know if they're going to affect you at all. And just after the news, I'm going to be doing my monologue on the COVID inquiry. Did you know that was even going on right now? There hasn't been much about it, has there? And I'm going to have Alan Miller here, and I'm going to have Molly Kingsley from Us For Them discussing what we want to come out of that inquiry and your views as well, GBviews at gbnews.uk. But first of all, here are your very latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Police in Thailand say at least 34 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a gunman opened fire at a childcare centre. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. Thai police say the gunman was a former officer. He was discharged from the police force last year and had appeared in court on drugs charges prior to opening fire. They've confirmed he killed himself, his wife and his child during the mass shooting. And some breaking news in the last few minutes. City of London police say they're aware of an incident after reports of multiple stabbings in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. The area in East London is a busy part of the financial district. We'll bring you updates as we get them. The Prime Minister is at a summit in Prague today for an historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. Liz Truss will call for European unity and address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. She'll say Europe is facing its biggest crisis since the Second World War following Russian aggression. Ms Truss will also hold talks with her French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. Hate crimes in England and Wales have increased by 26% in the last year, but police are prosecuting a small proportion of those offences. Official figures show there were over 155,000 hate crimes recorded by officers up to March this year. It's the biggest increase in hate crimes in 5 years, but the number of offences resulting in a police charge are at 8% of the total recorded. The Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over pay. They're calling for an above-inflation increase. It's amid warnings that record numbers of nurses are leaving the industry. The RCN's General Secretary says it's a once-in-a-generation chance to improve staff shortages and nurses' pay. The result of the ballot is due early next month. Meanwhile, around 500 emergency call handlers have joined a BT Group walkout today in a dispute over pay. The Communication Workers Union, which represents BT workers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU says the position has changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. A further 3 days of walkouts are planned to take place later this month. The union's General Secretary Dave Ward told GB News BT are upping the ante.
I mean, it cannot be right that call centre workers earning between £21,000 and £27,000 a year are having to go on strike. They're at a tipping point. The actual situation with BT is that they are refusing to negotiate. They've had 2.5 weeks' notice of this dispute. We would rather be in a room sitting with them today trying to get this dispute resolved than being out on strike.
The Chancellor's meeting with UK banks and building societies today amid rising mortgage rates following the mini-budget last month. Kwasi Kwarteng will attempt to calm executives ahead of his plans to loosen market regulation in financial services. A number of high street leaders, including HSBC, Santander and Virgin Money, have withdrawn products for new borrowers after the mini-budget. The typical rate for a 2-year fixed mortgage has risen above 6% for the first time in 14 years. At least 2 people have been killed in Ukraine's southern city of Zaporizhia. Ukrainian officials say Russian rockets hit residential buildings overnight. The city is one of 4 Ukrainian regions annexed by Russia. Kyiv says it'll never accept the illegal seizure of its territories by force, which has been condemned by Ukraine's allies. Meanwhile, President Zelensky claims Ukraine's counter-offensive is continuing to gain ground as 3 more villages in the Kherson region are liberated. And Kevin Spacey is due to appear in a US court to face an allegation he sexually assaulted a boy 36 years ago. Actor Anthony Rapp claims he was the victim of an unwanted sexual advance at a party in 1986 when he was 14 years old. The trial comes less than 3 months after the Oscar-winning actor appeared in a UK court, where he faces a separate 5 charges of sexual assault. Mr. Spacey denies all of the accusations against him. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, let's return to Bev with To The Point.
Good morning, welcome back. You are watching Bev Turner on GB News on your TV, or you're listening to me on your radio, or you might be looking at the nifty little app we have. I hope you've uploaded it by now. We've got a great show lined up for you. For our final hour, here's what's on the menu. Baroness Heather Hallett, the head of the COVID inquiry, has said those who have suffered will be at the heart of the independent inquest. She has promised to cover all aspects and how prepared the UK was to deal with the pandemic. A new video posted online appears to show schoolgirls heckling a member of Iran's feared paramilitary after anti-government protests sweep the country and spread to the classrooms over the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. I'm going to be looking at that in a little bit more detail later and talking to Maya Tuzi. And today, the Transport Salaried Staffs Association members working on the Great Western Railway routes between London, Paddington and the South West are striking over the ongoing dispute over pay, job security and conditions. I'm going to talk to the organising director of TSSA on that. We've got all of that still to come this morning and much more across the programme. Your views as well. I will be getting to those in just a moment. GB Views at gbnews.uk. But first, this. Now, how clearly do you remember events since March 2020 when Boris Johnson thumped his fist on the desk and said, "You must stay at home"? I don't know about you, but much of it is actually a blur. Some days I can barely remember what year it is because time became so elastic under the psychologically destabilising experience of living under a regime which constantly changed the goalposts of liberty without ever clearly explaining why. I still have to check myself. Which holiday did we miss? When did the kids' exams get cancelled? Was it 1 or 2 Christmases that caused family rifts? Which is why we really need, an official inquiry which turns every decision that was made under the auspices of controlling an airborne virus through a 360-degree analysis. Lady Hallett, who is currently in charge of the inquiry, which began this week, must hold every single decision in the palm of her hand and inspect it thoroughly for flecks of gold where we got it right and ugly flaws where we did not. I say we, but of course I mean the leading politicians of that time, Boris Johnson, Javid, Zahawi and Hancock, plus the now knighted chief medical officers, Vallance, Whitty and Van Tam. And Lady Hallett must also establish who was telling them what to do and why. But I am not optimistic. My biggest fear is that this, like so much of the COVID narrative, will focus on why we didn't lock down sooner, harder and for longer. If Hallett focuses only on the deceased with COVID on a death certificate, rather than a myriad of social, economic and psychological collateral damages, then I believe she's likely to conclude that there should have been more restrictions. And then we're all doomed. Because next time, surely this report will be used for even greater means of control. And what government wouldn't want such powers? Heck, some people absolutely loved lockdowns, virtue signalling with a mask and finger pointing at their neighbours. Hallett will have a number of cheerleaders looking to stay at home again and get paid by the taxpayer while decorating the front room. Understandably, there are serious questions from the bereaved about the way in which COVID-positive patients were returned to care homes, the way in which the dying had to say goodbye on iPads, the lack of decent PPE in spring 2020 when doctors on the front line were still trying to understand how this coronavirus, possibly mutated for gain-of-function research in a biolab, operated. But this report must also explain why the pandemic preparedness plan was torn up in favour of a Chinese-style lockdown, which unprecedentedly quarantined the healthy rather than the unwell. Why did the government think that asymptomatic transmission was valid when it was promptly dismissed by many medics across the world as blatantly unscientific? Why were decades of understanding about natural immunity after coronavirus infection suddenly ignored? Why did the government rely on wildly inaccurate and unscientific modelling patterns to decide policy when other infectious disease specialists were screaming into the abyss that they were incorrect? I have more. Why did the system suddenly record any death within 28 days of a positive test as a COVID victim, regardless of whether that person died from the multiple internal inflammatory effects of COVID or in a car crash? It made no sense, unless somebody, who, wanted the figures artificially inflated? Who decreed that healthy children needed to be kept away from school with all of the damage that that entailed, instead of implementing targeted protection of the elderly? Who decided it would be a good idea to get GPs to phone people with pre-existing conditions, like my own mother, to ask if they would sign a do not resuscitate order? My mum was sitting at the kitchen table eating a sandwich at the time and told the GP that wasn't currently on her to-do list. But the shock of certain impending doom on a 74-year-old woman was distressing, to say the least. These insane decisions, which nobody was freely allowed to discuss, never mind question, were rooted where? In what financial quagmire did the tendrils of these pronouncements lie? Who benefited? What forces were at play? As far as I know, nobody from the counter-narrative side of this sorry story is giving evidence. So I fear that Lady Hallett will function in yet another echo chamber of unbalanced opinion. But know this, Lady Hallett, some people, like me, will be watching carefully to scrutinise your findings. You know where we are. Get in touch. We would love to help. British people deserve answers. Now, I am joined in the studio by the fantastic Alan Miller from the Together Declaration. And also, I think down the line, we have the co-author of the Children's Inquiry and co-founder of children's charity Us For Them, Molly Kingsley. Good morning to you both. I don't know if I've left you anything to say now after that rant, but you guys, like me, know that this is therapeutic, is it not? Alan, let me come to you first. What did I miss? I must have missed some things that need looking at.
Well, I think it was very comprehensive, Bev, and it's very important, but it needs to be said that if anything that comes out of this inquiry, the first thing is always to have a cost-benefit analysis. In the talk of science and in the talk of safety, we need to be able to evaluate what the cost of something, what the risk is and what the benefit. That's whether we talk about schools, whether we talk about any kind of restrictions or impositions, certainly about lockdowns that are unprecedented. As you say, why was the pandemic strategy thrown away and dispensed with? But a cost-benefit analysis and also parliamentary discussion and public debate. The other thing that was really damaged and impacted was the idea of free open speech. Why did Ofgem announce certain things? Why was it the case that we've seen so many scientists and citizens taken down from platforms, which is continuing now and with the Online Safety Bill? So a cost-benefit analysis for everything. And the Public Health Act, which was actually the thing that was used to implement lockdowns. So whilst people quite rightly were talking about emergency measures, we still have that, and at a flick of a pen, we could be there all over again. And I think that one thing about the COVID inquiry is that, you know, inquiries often take a long time, and sometimes people hope that it will all be finished by then. But the one thing about this is that many people have written into it, and there appears to be a kind of predisposition to go in a certain direction. And the reality is you only get trust in society if you have full, proper scrutiny. And we really need to address this in a grown-up fashion.
Molly, am I right in saying that the initial terms of reference for this report didn't even include looking at the effects on children? And actually, it was largely thanks to your campaigning and the Us For Them team that they are now including those effects.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite incredible, really, Beth. So it did mention education, but there was, I think, half a line in another paragraph given to it. So you're exactly right. We said, look, this is really outrageous. Like, you know, obviously the impact on education is a big thing, but actually the impact more generally on children and young people has just been staggering. And I think one of the really important things here actually is, you know, when we talk about loss and harm, I think we have to remember, and, you know, without wanting to at all undermine the terrible loss that many families did feel directly through COVID. You know, many thousands of people lost relatives and loved ones, and that is really important to remember. But, you know, we do know that COVID is a very discriminatory illness. So by and large, it targeted people who were elderly and vulnerable, whereas all the side effects, which include death, by the way, they include serious injury and death, the side effects of lockdown targeted young people. And there's this term, quality assured life years. And I think one of the things we're now discovering is that young people and children, some of them, will be living with the impacts of lockdown for the rest of their lives. And that's huge. And, you know, I think, sorry, go on, Beth.
No, I was just going to say, have you or anybody from Us For Them been asked to contribute to Lady Hallett's inquiry?
No, so we applied for core participant status for Module 1, that's out in the open, and we will be applying for other modules. We got rejected for Module 1. We had a, you know, very polite letter back. We've applied with Anne Longfield, who's the Children's Commissioner. So we were maybe a little surprised to be rejected from Module 1. Really interestingly, though, I don't know if you saw, the core participants, and for listeners, you have core participants who are people that are called or who apply to be, I guess, central to the inquiry. And you also have witnesses, people the inquiry will call to give evidence. So we shouldn't read too much into the list of core participants because, you know, other organisations and individuals will be giving evidence alongside those. But the list of core participants for Module 1 is now available, and you can see who applied and who got it. And the thing that really jumps out is that by and large, it is government departments. So that's the first thing. And you think, to your point about the echo chamber of groupthink, you think, well, you've got all these people who are intimately involved in possibly the worst example of groupthink in our lifetimes giving evidence. You know, it doesn't reassure that much. The other thing from a child point of view that is really interesting is it looks, I haven't had a chance yet to verify this with DfE, but it looks like the Department for Education didn't even apply to be a core participant for Module 1. And you think, hang on, guys, Module 1 is pandemic preparedness. So, you know, how were we or were we not prepared for a pandemic? Now, we know that schools not only play an educational role, they play a critical safeguarding role for children in any emergency. How can it possibly be that the Department for Education didn't think that they were needed for that module? It defies belief.
It really does. So how about you, Alan? Anyone for the Together Declaration?
We all submitted. We have not been brought on there, but we're going to continue to have people write in. It's interesting that they are not taking testimonies from some families, they announced. It's also interesting that Mark Drakeford has said that he didn't think there should be one in Wales specifically.
Well, the Scottish one has fallen to bits because the chair has resigned with personal reasons, whatever that means, and some of the lawyers on her team have disbanded.
Indeed.
And like you say, Drakeford says in Wales, we don't need one. COVID is forgotten now.
Yeah. And I think this is really the important thing. We still have many of the legacies. So whilst the mandate was actually overturned as a consequence of the public and brave frontline workers saying no and challenging it and winning hearts and minds, and this is the important thing about an inquiry, it's about an open, transparent discussion, or it should be. And that needs to happen. And the thing is, we still have the legacy of things like the vaccine passports on Freedom Day. If we remember Boris Johnson saying it's Freedom Day now and we're going to have vaccine passports.
Yeah.
It impacts not just on hospitality, but on our freedom. Now we have the discussion about digital ID. We've seen recently just, you know, Molly, Us For Them and Free Speech Union being taken down by PayPal.
Yeah.
We know what happened in Canada with people who gave money to the truckers. There's a big discussion about digital currency, the surveillance question, autonomy and choice, privacy. All these things need to be scrutinised. People will say, well, it was an emergency, we had to save lives. And actually, many warned at the time, the consequence of lockdowns will be far-reaching and have a terrible legacy. We're now dealing with a cost of living and cost of lockdown crisis. Some people do want to forget it. This inquiry that's been delayed for quite a long time has accrued many, many more costs, and who knows when it's really going to come out.
Yeah.
We should be having this debate and discussion all the time, and actually responsibility needs to be addressed and taken.
I couldn't agree more. I don't know if Molly's still with us, isn't she? Molly, how optimistic are you then that it will be transparent, it will be balanced, and we will see an outcome which will protect our future generations in the event of another pandemic?
Look, I mean, I don't like thinking the worst, so let's hope for the best. I think, as Alan said, and picking up a really important point, if that is going to happen, Bev, if it's going to be transparent and genuinely helpful, there are some really uncomfortable questions that as a society actually we're not yet asking. And the inquiry is going to have to ask them. So, in particular, again, picking up from what Alan said, what we saw in the last 2 years has been staggering breaches of medical ethics. And there are real questions, I think, about how some of what happened in terms of loss of liberty, but also in terms of breach of medical ethics, coercing a vaccination on adults, pushing it out to children in absence of long-term safety, all this kind of thing. We need answers for this. But to get to a point where there are answers, you have to ask questions. And do I see society asking these questions yet in an honest way? No, I don't. So is it realistic to think the inquiry will?
Well, let's hope so. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. You did plug the many holes that I missed in my monologue. I think we could have done a whole 2 hours on this. It's a very important topic. I wish the public would be plugged into it more. We will bring it to our GB News viewers as much as we possibly can. Molly Kingsley from Us For Them and Alan Miller from Together Organisation, thank you so much. Now, coming up in just a moment, a new video posted online appears to show schoolgirls heckling a member of Iran's feared paramilitary force. I'm going to be talking about that in just a moment after this quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, welcome back to GB News with me, Bev Turner, here until at 12 o'clock, live on your TV, online and radio. You have been getting in touch with your views. I did ask you, and you never disappoint. Layla has said, what we have now is a load of old talk, no practicality, no action, no plan. This is in relation to Liz Truss and the conferences. Talk about growth, 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 and everybody clap. It's so easy. We can all do that and get excited. We need to see action. Thank you, Layla. And Dina said, hi, Bev, great show as usual. Thank you very much. I'm so annoyed with every news channel. Labour are getting away with saying things that are not true. Rachel Reeves keeps stating that the Bank of England spent £65 billion on buying government debt when the pound dropped, but they actually spent £3.5 billion. It needs correcting, so public actually know this. We do what we can, Dean. Thank you very much. Keep all of your messages coming. Oh, and this one from Mark, who said, my neighbour swapped his electric vehicle for a petrol car because the former was too expensive to run. Ironically, we were talking about the fuel protest just before. Now, I don't know whether you've seen what's happening in Iran. I really wanted to cover this story because I think it's incredibly significant, and particularly, I think, for women and girls worldwide. And so I am delighted to be joined in the studio now by Maya Touzi to explain all of this. Good morning, Maya. Right, give us an understanding of the political situation in Iran. How have we got to this point in 2022 when these girls are ripping off their headscarves and trying to assert their claim on being liberated?
Yeah, firstly, special thank you for covering it, because there have been people like me have been trying for the past few weeks to use my YouTube channel, Twitter and everything to actually get the mainstream media to actually talk about it, but you guys are actually doing it. It's fascinating because obviously the revolution happened back in 1979, and this was not a revolution. People in Iran would call it an occupation by the Islamic regime. And every 10 years, at least coincidentally, there's been a movement, and it's always been crushed. And some people would say, actually, to be fair, while those were important civil rights issues, it was mostly led by the young, educated middle classes and a lot of men. And the regime used to have a tactic. You just shoot at a couple of people, everybody else run away, because the Iranian culture, they're not revolutionaries. Right. But this time, the last movement we had was in 2009 when an election was rigged. And again, that lasted for a while, but again, it died. This didn't really start from what we know of. The 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who got arrested and killed by the morality police. That was just a spark. This actually started in 2019.
Right.
This is a combination of an extreme cost of living crisis combined with the dignity and respect that's been lost. And this is basically the rise of the Persian Iranians, the Turkish Iranians, the Kurdish Iranians, all over the country rather than just the capital. You have the young, you have the old, you have men, women, now school children. In fact, because of the spark, because of the Mahsa Amini, it actually this time it was led by women. And over the last few days, we've seen footage that school children, schoolgirls are burning their headscarves and actually pushing out the regime thugs who come to the school to actually tell them to kind of calm down and follow the rules.
Well,
listening.
That's what we're looking at here. So that school had invited a member of the Iranian paramilitary.
Yeah.
And ordinarily, so just tell us, how normally would those girls have responded to somebody like that?
Just basic silence.
Subservience.
So not really actually agreeing, not really obeying. Both the regime and the people have always turned a blind eye against each other. So the regime know that people don't really like them, but as long as the people never revolted, everybody was fine. It was a handshake kind of agreement. But this time, the reason it's different is because it's not only is everywhere in the country, all groups of people and everything from the different ages and different genders and different everything, but actually the difference is they've lost that fear. They don't have that fear anymore.
Why?
I mean, there are theories behind it, but it's still too abnormal for a human or a group of humans to completely lose that fear. As I said before, they could shoot at a couple of people and everybody will run away. Yeah. But this time they just walk towards the security forces, take off their headscarves. They know what could happen to them, like the other women that's happened, but they still don't care. So they shoot at me. I don't care anymore.
It's phenomenal. Is it partly because of I mean, what was the COVID situation in Iran? Did they have lockdowns like we have had as well?
Yeah, I mean, they still essentially had all the measures or certain measures until quite recently in terms of face mask and everything else. Although the face mask tactic backfired on the Iranian regime because now protesters are using them to hide their faces. Some people were confused, like, why are they wearing masks? It's because they want to hide their faces. So that backfired massively. But the COVID situation was absolutely horrible because you think our government's kind of mishandled in terms of the lives that were lost during lockdown. But actually, in Iran, they didn't really do public health properly. They didn't really handle the people who were just under lockdown, losing education, losing their jobs. So everybody lost. But it kind of created a pause. They used it as a wartime situation in Iran to create a fake unity. Right. But they thought that the uprising that started in 2019 is just gone now. They were not really expecting one 22-year-old woman. That happens, unfortunately, all the time, that sort of situation.
Does it?
Yeah, the morality police and things like that. That's exactly how my mother actually came to this country. She was a political refugee because she was chased by the morality police on the streets, and then she obviously came here. So that is creating a fascinating situation. Now, to kind of point out the main issue is that, of course, it's the cost of living crisis kind of created the lack of fear. But this revolution is a revolution for being able to sing. It's a revolution to be able to dance.
And in a nutshell, because we're running out of time, how optimistic are you that this will end well for the Iranian people and the Iranian women and girls?
It will end. It will be a happy ending, but of course there will be a bloody period first. But it would not be like Egypt or Libya or Syria. It's a very different culture, different country. We'll be fine.
OK, thank you so much. Maya Tuzi. You can find Maya on his YouTube channels and on social medias. Now, very quickly, after this short break, Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed laws to claim 4 regions of Ukraine as Russia's territory. His military struggled yesterday to control these illegally annexed areas. We're going to be looking at all of that after the news.
Thank you, Bev. It's 11:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Police in Thailand say at least 34 people have been killed, including 22 children, after a gunman opened fire at a childcare centre. It happened in the northeastern province of Nong Bua Lampu. Thai police say the gunman was a former officer discharged from the police force last year. They've confirmed he killed himself, his wife and his child during the mass shooting. And some breaking news in the last half hour. City of London Police says 3 people have been stabbed in an incident in Bishopsgate near Liverpool Street Station. The area in East London is a busy part of the financial district. Posting on social media, police said the 3 victims have been taken to hospital, but their condition is not yet known. The incident is still ongoing, but it's not being treated as terror-related. The Prime Minister's at a summit in Prague today for an historic first meeting of a new political club of nations. Liz Truss will call for European unity and address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. She'll say Europe is facing its biggest crisis since the Second World War following Russian aggression. Liz Truss will also hold talks with French President Emmanuel Macron in what could mark a new phase in the UK's post-Brexit relations with Europe. The Royal College of Nursing is balloting its members for strike action for the first time in its 106-year history. Around 300,000 nurses will vote whether to walk out over pay. They're demanding an above-inflation increase. The RCN's General Secretary says it's a once-in-a-generation chance to improve staff shortages and nurses' pay. The result of the ballot is due early next month. Meanwhile, around 500 emergency call handlers are set to join a BT Group walkout today. The Communication Workers Union, which represents BT workers, had previously agreed to exempt 999 staff from the strike action. The CWU said the position had changed after widespread outrage at the company's refusal to negotiate. Further walkouts are planned later this month. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. To the Point with Beth Turner is back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Here's a snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1253 and €1.1387. The price of gold is £1,524.74 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,013 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, you are watching Bev Turner on GB News. Thank you for staying with me. You've been getting in touch with everything that you want us to know. Colin has said the COVID inquiry, we were talking about that just before the break, should really be a criminal investigation due to the total mismanagement and by Boris in particular when he didn't attend COVID meetings. And Carol has said the overriding memory of the beginning of COVID is of the state of the NHS, of nurses being worked into the ground, of medical staff having to make decisions as to who might receive benefit from respiratory machines, of the Prime Minister himself at 55 being in danger of losing his life. It might be worth remembering all that before debunking the whole notion of lockdown. Thank you, Carol. I do remember all of that. And I did say that what I know is going to happen is that the COVID inquiry is going to look into all of those things from that side of the perspective. And what I was trying to do was give this a little bit of balance. But as always on GB News, we appreciate all of your thoughts, regardless of the area that you come from and the position on it. So thank you. Right, now, moving on. It's sort of easy to forget what's going on over in Ukraine, isn't it? Russian President Vladimir Putin signed laws that claimed 4 regions of Ukraine, the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, as Russian territory. While his military struggled yesterday to control these illegally annexed areas, the move followed Kremlin-orchestrated referendums in Ukraine that the Ukrainian government and the West dismissed as illegitimate. So Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov joins us now. Good morning. Oh, sorry, before this, we've got a little bit of video to show you because this is actually only broken just recently. Let's take a look at what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say this morning, just a few minutes ago, actually, when he addressed Australian foreign policy think tank, the Lowy Institute.
On September 30th this year, Russian leader announced the alleged annexation of the part of territory of Ukraine, over 4 of our regions, and still having some of Russian occupation contingent. This new attempt by Russia to grape someone else's property is an obvious attempt to repeat what happened in 2014, that is to repeat Crimea. It's not just annexation as such. Russia is trying to put the international community under such conditions so that the response to yet another Russian crime against international law would fail to correspond to the severity of such crime.
So joining me now is Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. Good morning, Kira. Nice to see you. Whereabouts are you now? Presumably you are in Ukraine. What is it like over there at the moment where you are?
So Ukraine keeps fighting, and whatever Putin says that he annexed, we are taking back with our military forces, because exactly at the same time when he signed the decree to annex our territories, Ukrainian forces were taking back exactly those territories, and we continue doing so because it is incredibly that something like this can happen in 21st century. And we appreciate all our allies not accepting what Putin declared, and we appreciate everybody who keeps helping us to fight back and to regain our territories before the winter hits. It's incredibly important to regain as many territories as possible. Another point is, aside of we are extremely grateful and extremely proud of our forces, we are terrified of what are the findings on those deoccupied territories. The last thing that stressed us the most was a box of dental crowns that were taken from alive people while they were tortured. We only have seen something like that in Nazi camps. And this has been repeated right now. And there are more occupied territories right now where people are suffering, where people are tortured, are killed, and are raped. And this has to stop. It is not just the fight for the territories, it's the fight for the freedom of our people.
It can feel, Kira, from here that there doesn't seem to be any incentive for peace, let me say. This feels like it's a very bloody battle that is going to go down to the last life, as opposed to holding talks, trying to find some sort of diplomatic means. Is it imaginary? Is it ludicrous to think that there may be peace available via diplomatic means?
All the peace talks need to be confirmed by who will make sure that Putin will keep his part of the bargain. And as of right now, I have not seen a single world leader coming up and saying, okay, I will be the one who will make sure that Putin would not attack again, that Putin will leave Ukrainian territories, and that we can live peacefully ever after. Because nobody wants to do that, because it's impossible, because Putin is acting on the imperialistic idea of expanding, of taking others' territories. And this is what he is doing. And this is why we see the only practical way of ending this is winning the war, regaining our territories, and making sure we liberate our people. There is no other way. At least there is no other way available right now.
OK, thank you very much for bringing us the latest. That was Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik letting us know what is going on over there in Ukraine. OK, on to a different story. A new study from the UK Commission of Bereavement has revealed that bereaved families are struggling after failing to get critical support 40% of those who wanted formal bereavement support never received any, including children, and the Commission is calling for more funding for services across the UK. So let's speak now to Royal College of General Practitioners and Marie Curie National Clinical Lead for End-of-Life Care, Dr. Catherine Millington-Sanders from Marie Curie. Good morning, Dr. Millington-Sanders. Thank you so much for joining us. It's easy to kind of ignore, isn't it, bereaved families when you are not one yourself. And yet when you are in the eye of that storm, there is nothing worse. So I guess what you're trying to raise awareness of is we have to think about these people and do what? What do you want to see?
Thank you so much. Well, firstly, it's been a delight working with the UK Commission on Bereavement. It's an independent commission. There are 15 commissioners that reflect diverse professional and cultural backgrounds from across all 4 UK nations, working with multiple charities, and Marie Curie is one of those. The really important part that we're asking for is that we really want that governments in the UK can actually transform people's experiences of grief by investing just 79 pence per person. And workplaces should be able to have a bereavement policy, and schools also should have a bereavement policy. It's really important that we heard from people to understand that we need to really tackle inequalities, to access and ensure that everybody from any community are actually having the right support, are able to access the support in the way that they need it, that's appropriate to their faith, their culture, and their background, and whatever their needs are.
And what are those needs typically when somebody has lost? And is it different as to whether you've lost a child or an elderly person or a spouse? I imagine the requirements are quite different.
So grief is unique for everybody, and it's important that therefore bereavement support is able to wrap around people's needs. And so while most people actually have all the support they need by their families and their friends and their wider community, it's what we heard was that some adults and children and young people, they don't, and they actually need more formal emotional support, whether that might be from a peer support group, a volunteer, or a professional therapist. So whilst we want to make sure that we enhance those supportive networks in our communities, so from faith leaders across schools, workplaces and things like that, it's really important that we also have signposting to formal support services that we can enhance across our communities as well. And these, what we heard is that some for formal support is important because it provides a non-judgmental space, and some people don't have family or they don't have the friends to be able to support them. And we heard that people actually lacked that support. So being able to access for some people is really important to have that formal support. Otherwise, we see in general practice people develop prolonged grief disorder and complex grief if they don't have support early on.
We're coy about death, aren't we, Catherine? And we are all uncomfortable often talking about our inherent mortality. Do you think that businesses, for instance, should have a bereavement policy like they would have a maternity absence policy?
I think it's so important. I mean, the majority of us will go through grief and bereavement and will lose at least one person at some point in our life. And I know, for example, when I lost my father, I was really lucky that my workplace wrapped around me, offered the support and compassionate leave that I needed for several weeks to be off and to be able to spend time with those people that are important. There's all things like having to sort out the administrative challenges for people. And sometimes that we heard from people in the Bereavement Commission that it just feels completely overwhelming when you've lost perhaps your parent or your spouse or a child. You're having to close bank accounts, for example. You're having to deal with making sure that you've got housing, you're paying your bills. And this is so important that employers actually can recognise the importance of this and support them, because basically then they will be able to come back to work earlier if they get the important support that they need. And they won't need to visit GPs, they won't need to sort of go to health services if they can actually access easily the support within their communities, or they can go to formal support easily.
Yeah, and thank goodness for charities like Marie Curie, who do the most remarkable job of helping families through the most unimaginably difficult times. Thank you so much for joining us. End-of-life care doctor there, Catherine Millington Sanders from Marie Curie. Now, a couple of your... Got to move on, but I want to let you know what you've been saying as well. Excellent monologue, Bev, says Carol. Thank you very much. Beverly, thank you for all your work and your guest speakers as well as your colleagues. It's important that we keep the public informed on the COVID inquiry, which seems to be slipping under the radar a little bit, doesn't it? More of you saying that you agreed with what I said. Thank you. That's always nice to hear, isn't it? And what else have you been telling me? Oh, Phil mentioned this. You know what? We can't tackle this today, but I'm sure that at some point GB News presenters will be. Can someone explain what growing the economy means in simple terms for ordinary people? Give me a few examples. Do you know what, Phil? It occurred to me as well. I should have asked somebody today. We need to know what we can do to get this growth. It might put money in our pockets, but why shouldn't prices increase to take that money out of our pockets and put it in the bank accounts of the super rich? When we talk about growth of the economy, it can be a little bit hard to pin down exactly what that might mean for us all in practical terms, isn't it? Well, talking about money, afraid we've got to do another story on strikes now. So today, the TSSA, that's the Transport Salaried Staffs Association members, working on the Great Western Railway route between Paddington and the South West, are striking over pay, job security and conditions. Those involved include staff working in ticket offices, stations, control rooms, other support roles. It comes after disruption yesterday when members of the Train Drivers Union, ASLEF, and the TSSA, encompassing 12 train operators, walked out, causing huge disruption. Let us talk to the organising director of the TSSA now, Nadine Ray. Good morning, Nadine. Good morning. Just tell me, why are you striking? Why now? What has changed? What do you need?
Well, our members, rail workers, they simply want job security and a decent pay increase in the face of this cost of living crisis. For them, they are entering into their third and fourth year of pay freeze. So not only are they facing the cost of living crisis, but they're doing that on the back of not having had any pay increase throughout the entire pandemic, which of course, you know, they're key workers. They worked all throughout that. So for them, this action is really important. They need the government to listen to them. And the government, what they need to do is provide permission to the train operating companies for them to negotiate with us. One of the measures that was taken throughout the pandemic was that the government took stronger control of the contracts with train operating companies. So now we're in an environment where if we are to negotiate, we need the train operating companies are saying to us they need express permission from the government, and that has not been forthcoming.
Right. Are you concerned in that industry that many of the jobs will inevitably be moving towards robots, for want of a better word, for digitisation, for machines? I mean, when we talk about the fact that some of the people who are striking are ticket staff, that made me think, do we even have those anymore? I guess it's a difficult balance, isn't it, Nadine, between making a fuss and not making so much fuss that lots of people are put out of work.
Well, in actual fact, one of the issues that is pertinent to this dispute is job security. Now, our members, TSSA members who worked in ticket offices, for instance, I mean, they know that change has happened over many years. They've been negotiating and consulting with companies around that change for many years now already. And they, we're not opposed to be looking at the future. What is happening at the moment is that those kind of discussions, which also need to be had when you're wearing your health and safety hat, you need to be thinking about the safety of people. When you're having discussions about change and discussions about technology, you need to be thinking about whether those situations are safe. Now, those discussions are not best placed in the middle of pay talks. So at the moment, change is being levered through pay negotiations instead of through proper consultation where matters such as safety, etc., can be deeply looked into and properly thought through. So there is an impact in this current dispute on that. And our members want to make sure that, yes, they're getting a fair pay increase in terms of that's going to help them through the cost of living crisis. But they also want to make sure that, that they have some job security in that process. And also that if there are changes to the industry, if there are changes changes to terms and conditions that need to be had. They're not opposed to talking about those things, but they want that to be done in the proper fashion, and they don't want it imposed, in particularly from people who don't do the work and don't understand what the implications for safety are.
The challenge for you is to take the public with you when everybody is already finding travel so difficult, whether you're in a car, trying to get on an aeroplane or trains. It's a nightmare out there at the moment. Angus has got in touch with us to say, wanting a pay rise in line with inflation is just ridiculous and unsustainable. Unions use these issues to stage political strikes. And another viewer, David, has said the unions don't want a settlement because it's a political strike. The left is seeping into every aspect of the workforce and it is damaging. Just respond to those if you would, Nadine.
Sure. I think it's really easy to blame workers or a particular group of workers for a wider political context. So yes, our members, rail workers, are facing cost of living issues in the same way everyone else is. So they want that opportunity to negotiate. They're willing to look and consider all options and all decent offers that are put to them. But at the moment, the block is with the government. They're not being able to negotiate. So they're also incredibly proud of the service they give. So they do understand and empathise with the public in that way.
Nadine Ray of the TSSA, thank you very much. You have certainly had your say here today. So have I, and so have lots of you at home. I am done for this week. Do not go anywhere. Up next, it's GB Newsday with Mark and Gloria. Have a lovely weekend.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. For many, a fine, bright day out there today. There's a fair bit of cloud across parts of south of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and a few showers likely here. It's quite breezy as well, but not as windy as yesterday. Low pressure dominant to the north. High pressure, though, controlling things further south, which means much of southern England, South Wales, won't see many showers at all. Staying dry and bright here, and the same goes for much of eastern England and northeast Scotland. It's further north and west where we've got more cloud and some outbreaks of rain pushing into North Wales and northwest England, across Northern Ireland and parts of western Scotland. A mixture of sunshine and blustery showers across the far north. In the sunny spells further south, well, temperatures getting up into the high teens, 20 Celsius is just about possible. Generally, we're looking at 16 or 17 the high. Through this evening, I think we'll see a bit more rain just moving through the central belt of Scotland, so turning fairly damp here. In fact, right across Scotland, there'll be outbreaks of rain for much of the night. Could be quite heavy, especially through the early hours, and we'll see rain returning to Northern Ireland as well overnight. Again, much of England and Wales staying dry. A milder night than last night. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures. On to the details for Friday, and we'll be watching this band of rain as it sinks south. It's going to be quite heavy, starting off across southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, heading quite quickly into northern England, then into parts of Wales. Either side of that, reasonably bright skies and just a few showers. But as this sinks southwards, could turn into quite a lively line of heavy rain, not lasting too long, but intense rain and squally winds where they just suddenly pick up over parts of the Midlands, Lincolnshire, South Wales and southwest England come the afternoon. Eventually getting into East Anglia and the southeast for Friday evening's rush hour. M25 could see a lot of rain in a short space of time. Following on from that, we'll see plenty of showers packing into western Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. Into the weekend, though, the showers fading. Many places looking dry on Saturday. We are expecting some rain on Sunday, though, for